Call your mother. Tell her to drive in from whatever small town she crawled out of. I need someone to scrub the floors. Those were the exact words, said not in anger, not in a fight, said calmly, almost cheerfully, by a woman sitting at dinner table in a penthouse apartment to her son's wife of 8 months. Her name was Helen. She was 61 years old. She wore designer clothes every day of the week, even Sundays. And from the moment she heard her son had married a girl from a small farming town, she decided this was a problem she would eventually correct. She just hadn't expected to say the quiet part out loud like that, but she had. And the room went very still. Anna didn't cry. That was the part that caught Helen off guard. Anna didn't flinch, didn't raise her voice, didn't storm out. She just set down her glass, looked at her mother-in-law, almost calm, and said, "Okay, I'll call her." 3 words, flat, quiet, certain, like someone who had just been handed exactly the opening they were waiting for. Helen blinked. She had expected tears. She had prepared for tears. She had no idea what to do with this. Michael, sitting at the far end of the table, stared at his wife. Anna was already reaching for her phone. You need to understand something about Helen. She wasn't cruel, not really. She just believed there were 2 kinds of people, people like her and everyone else, and the girl from a small farming town. That wasn't a daughter-in-law. That was a mistake. She'd been patient. She'd been polite. But that night, she stopped pretending. Anna's mother picked up on the second ring. "Mom," Anna said, stepping into the hallway, her voice low and steady. "Can you come this weekend? There's someone I want you to meet." A pause. Then, from the other end of the line, a voice, warm, unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once in 60 years been in a rush. "Of course, sweetheart, would Saturday work for you?" "Saturday's perfect," Anna said. She hung up, walked back into the dining room, sat down, picked up her fork. Helen watched her from across the table, trying to read something in her face. Nervousness, maybe, or regret. She found nothing there, just a young woman eating pasta completely at ease, which for reasons Helen couldn't quite name, was the most unsettling thing she had seen all evening. The week passed. Michael tried to talk to Anna on Wednesday night. He sat on the edge of the bed and said the things people say when they know they've allowed something wrong to happen and haven't yet decided whether to fix it. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. She grew up differently. She just wants what's best for Michael. Anna said his name, just his name, and he stopped. "Do you think she's right about me?" He opened his mouth, he closed it, and in that silence, that 4-second devastating silence, Anna got her answer. She nodded slowly, like a woman confirming something she had already suspected. "I see," she said. She turned off the lamp, and that was the end of that conversation. Saturday arrived. Helen was up at 8. She dressed carefully, not too formal, she decided. She didn't want to intimidate the woman. She wanted the gap between them to be visible naturally without effort. She told the housekeeper to use the everyday dishes. "Keep it simple," she said. "We don't want anyone feeling out of place." Her husband Robert, a quiet man who had learned over 30 years of marriage that silence was almost always the right choice, poured his coffee and looked out the window. "Should be interesting," he said. Helen smiled. "It'll be fine." At 11:30, the elevator opened. Helen crossed the living room, smoothed her jacket, opened the door, and stopped. The woman standing in the hallway was not what she had built in her mind over the past 8 months. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't wide eyed. She wasn't clutching a casserole dish with both hands or looking at the apartment like she'd never seen high ceilings before. She was, and Helen would spend a long time finding the right word for this, settled. That was it. Settled. The way very few people are settled, even people with money, even people with status. The kind of settled that doesn't come from what you own. It comes from knowing, deeply, unshakably, knowing who you are. Her name was Dorothy. She was 56. She wore a simple gray coat over a cream blouse, a single gold watch, hair neat, not styled, hands that had clearly worked for decades and made no apology for it. Behind her, a young man from a car service carried a wooden box, jars of preserves, a fresh sourdough loaf, a bottle of something amber colored with a handwritten label. Dorothy smiled. Helen, she said, like they were old friends. What a beautiful home. Thank you for having me. Helen stepped aside. She wasn't entirely sure when she'd decided to do that. At the table, Dorothy was the most comfortable person in the room. She asked Robert about his work. She asked about the neighborhood. She talked about the drive. Easy, she said. Only 3 hours. She'd left before dawn to miss the traffic. She laughed easily. She listened the way people listen when they're actually interested, not just being polite. And then Robert, leaning forward in that way he had when something genuinely caught his attention, asked about the farm. Anna mentioned you've been running it a long time, he said. Dorothy nodded. Since I was 29. Started with 40 acres and a second-hand tractor. She smiled at something private. We're sitting at about 12,000 acres now. Processing facility, distribution, the whole thing. We supply most of the major retailers on the East Coast. Picked up a national contract last spring. The table was quiet, not politely quiet. Quiet in the way rooms go quiet when the air pressure changes. Robert blinked. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at his wife with an expression she had never particularly enjoyed receiving. Helen was looking at the jar on the table, at the label on the jar, Henderson Family Farms, established 1994. She had seen that label before, at the grocery store, at the farmers' markets she went to on weekends because she thought it made her seem grounded. She had bought their strawberry preserves more than once. In the hallway, while Robert and Dorothy talked in the living room, Michael found Anna. He looked like a man who had been underwater for a long time and had just broken the surface. Anna. She looked at him. I'm sorry, not a small sorry, a real one. She waited. I sat there for months and said nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace. I wasn't. I was just, I was a coward, and you deserved better than that. Anna was quiet for a moment. I never needed you to fight my battles, Michael. She said, I just needed to know you were on my side. He nodded once, slow. I am, he said. I should have said it a long time ago. I'm saying it now. It wasn't everything, but it was real. And it mattered. And Anna, who had always known the difference, recognized it. Dorothy left at 2 o'clock. She hugged Anna in the entryway, long, unhurried, the hug of a woman who knew her daughter had been holding something heavy for a long time. Helen stood nearby. For the first time in maybe 30 years, she didn't know what to say. Dorothy, she started, I want you to know, I hope today was. Dorothy looked at her, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something much quieter and much harder, to argue with. Helen, she said, I grew up with very little. I built what I have by working hard and treating people the way I wanted to be treated. Every person, regardless of where they came from. She put on her coat. Your son married a remarkable woman. I hope one day you'll let yourself see that. She kissed Anna on the cheek. Head up, she whispered, always. The elevator doors closed. The apartment was very quiet. Robert walked past his wife without a word, but he paused at the hallway just for a moment and said, without turning around, she's right, you know, about Anna. Then he was gone. Helen stood alone in her entryway, in her beautiful, expensive, carefully curated entryway. And for the first time in a very long while, it felt a little hollow. There's kind of confidence that money can buy. You can see it in the clothes, the address, the way someone holds a wine glass. And then there's the other kind, the kind that gets built slowly over decades in places nobody's watching, in fields, at 5 in the morning, in hard seasons, in years when things don't work and you get up and try again anyway. That kind doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just walks through the door, quietly, warmly, carrying a jar of homemade preserves. And the whole room feels it. Helen felt it. She just felt it. About 30 years too late.